important ideas to pull into the mix to build the overall picture of how this works. I think probably there's a little overstatement in the expectations arena, and that's okay. I don't mean to say that you shouldn't have any expectations, but we'll try to connect all those dots, especially now as we talk about communication and how that works, because that first set of questions was, let's talk about this issue of expectations. What are your needs? What are my needs? Do we have an awareness of one another's needs? Part of the conversation, hopefully, that you have about those is it legitimate for me to have this expectation of you? Is this a legitimate expectation to have? Let's talk about that. Let's assess our expectations. Let's evaluate them. Let's flesh them out. What does that look like day to day? And is that really what you mean that you need? Is this really something that I can provide for you? Are you putting too much on the marriage, on the relationship with this expectation? So this isn't a blind process. It can't be a blind process. In fact, that's the problem, is that this area of expectations has been left as a blind problem. It just sits out there and we just kind of live with it. We either live with the disappointment that my expectations are not being met, or we begin to go on the attack because I need these to be met and I need you to meet them, and why aren't you doing that? And so that becomes kind of the context of the conversation of our marriage. So there's either the suffering and silence or the continuous press to meet the needs, and both of those things become destructive. And so we don't want to just have this be a blind process. I just don't want you to shut your eyes and serve and shut up and just keep doing it over and over and over and over again, because that's what Jesus would do. That's really not what I'm saying. I just want to start with that kind of extreme posture of servanthood and what it might look like, and then let's fine-tune it as we kind of walk through the rest of these processes. Okay, so the first one would be communication, because I do really think that we don't talk about these things often enough. They really are unspoken, and we may not even be aware of them. They just kind of linger there as these sub-ideas in our mind that we just kind of, I don't know why I'm disappointed, but I am. And so I want to start with this idea of communication, and Ephesians chapter 4 is my context for some of these principles that come out, specifically this idea of the sun and anger. Ephesians chapter 4, don't let the sun go down on your anger. And I think that's a marvelous communication marriage principle. Now, if you read the book of Ephesians, read chapter 4, I think the unifying theme that runs through chapter 4 of the book of Ephesians is the theme of truth. And it talks about how we've been transformed from futility, the futility of our mind, to a mind that has understanding. If you read that passage of Scripture and look for all of the synonyms for truth, they're all over the place. The word mind, the word ignorance, all of those things flourish in Ephesians chapter 4. I'm going to say Ephesians chapter 4, one of the themes or one of the keys, one of the key ideas in that passage is truth. And Paul talks a lot about the different elements of truth in terms of the church life, in terms of conversion, in terms of the Gentiles coming into the kingdom. It all has to do with this confrontation, this absorption, this engagement with truth. And then he transitions to this very list of practical things, prohibitions and different things. Don't steal, he talks about there. And he talks about not letting the sun go down in your anger, and there's many other things. But what I like to do is examine that phrase, don't let the sun go down on your anger, in light of the idea of truth. How do I explain that phrase using truth as the key concept? So maybe to help us, I'll start with stealing. How is stealing related to truth? If I grab your tablet from your table as you were at break and I stick it in my bag with the intention of taking it home, if I steal your tablet, essentially what I'm doing is lying about possessions. I'm stating that what is not mine belongs to me. It's a lie. It's a lie with regard to what I own. This is not mine, it's yours, but stealing it or taking it and putting it in my backpack is stating that it in fact does belong to me. It's a lie. I think that's a helpful kind of paradigm to see or to think about. And when I think about don't let the sun go down in your anger, I want to put it into the same context. Don't let the sun go down in your anger. How can I explain that with truth as the guiding or the underlying element? And the way that I would do that is by saying, going to bed angry, because for the ancient person, basically when the sun went down, unless it was a unique night, typically you were just getting ready to sleep. There wasn't much else to do. You were burning resources at a certain level that was not really profitable. It was just more practical to sleep when the sun was down. So let's go to sleep. So I'm going to modernize that by saying don't go to sleep angry. And the way I talk about that with regard to truth is if I'm angry and I lay my head down on my pillow to rest, I am not at peace. So I've taken the posture of peace, sleep, and rest when there is no peace. So going to bed angry is lying about my emotional state. And there's a disconnect. There's a lack of integrity in my actions and my emotions when I sleep angry. So it's lying about my attitude, lying about my inner person, lying about my emotional state. In marriage, I think this is a good principle, is to take the posture of the altar and repeat that every time you lay your head on the pillow. I would imagine that this is a universally true statement. Obviously, certainly there's going to be exceptions to this. But for most of us, when we stood at the altar, this was our internal emotional mantra. I love you. I don't want to spend my life with anybody but you. And the only thing I have to tell you right now is I love you. I don't have anything that I have to I don't have any offense that I have to share with you. There's nothing that's bothering me right now. The only thing that I have for you right now is I love you and I want to live the rest of my life with you. Now, if that's the true state of being at the altar, I want to replicate that every time I lay my head down on the pillow. I have nothing to tell you right now except that I love you. There's nothing else in the mix. I'm not harboring any anger toward you. I'm not hurt and not speaking it right now. I'm not confused about your level of love for me right now. That I am certain that that's what's going through your head too. Now that's a very simple thing that if you practiced every day, we could not have this marriage seminar. That if that were the case every day, that's all I have to say to you is I love you. Nothing else. There's nothing burdening me. There's nothing on my mind. That's it. That would be an ideal place to get each and every day. Now, had I done that from day one, I would have very little emotional management to do as I walked along. I took care of this day today in this primary relationship, and it's good. But for most of us, we've not practiced that every day. We have let the sun go down on our anger. We've laid our heads down on the pillows, and we've had a little bit of an emotional disconnect going on. But we've rationalized it. We've said one of two things. I'm tired, and this is too big a deal, and I can't afford to get into it right now because I've got stuff to do tomorrow. I got to get to sleep. And I just don't have the energy to take care of it right now, so we'll take care of it later. But you've kept it to yourself. And you just kind of said, I can't do it. I'm going to go to sleep. Good night, honey, I love you. Or it was too small. It's like, this isn't worth talking about. You're just being an idiot. This is stupid. But it's still there. And so we say, I'll feel better in the morning. And we go to sleep. And in so doing, we've let the sun go down on our anger. Do that once, not big deal. You can recover. Do that twice, probably not a big deal either. You might even be able to get up to, 10, 20, and still have it become manageable for your life. But you keep doing that repeatedly, and you're going to get yourself into some deep trouble. So what I like to talk about at this point, that's the principle, is the principle of not letting the sun go down on your marriage. It's not only damaging to your relationship, it could be damaging to your health. These are the kinds of things that cause you stress. Sleeping when you're not at peace is not a healthy practice. Just at any level, it's just not healthy. So I use this analogy called the dump truck analogy that I want to share with you. I find it helpful. Most people, when they come into my office for counseling, and I'm serious when I say this, most people when they come into my office for counseling are there because they don't know what's going on. And that's why they finally broken down to come in. They just can't figure it out. And like that couple I referenced earlier, they've gone from a place of deep love to a place now of everything onto antipathy about the relationship, withdrawal from the relationship, to full-blown anger and hatred. And you go, wow, and they go, wow, how did we get here? And we don't understand how we got here. I don't know how this happened, but it happened. And I think it's really a matter of this letting the sun go down on their anger and violating my dump truck principles. So let's just imagine that your life is like driving a dump truck. And when these issues come up, it's like throwing a rock into the back of your dump truck. And if you continue to throw rocks in the back of your dump truck, you begin to have a full load. So let me give you two scenarios. We knew a marvelous couple. They're a couple that we really framed many of our marriage principles on when we were in college. This couple, we thought they were the greatest. We were college students. We worked with junior high school and high school students. And one of our favorite junior high school kids, his name was Greg, had Wayne and Lois as his parents. And we just thought Greg and his brother were great. We looked at their family and we said, this is a great family. We love them. We love how they do family. We love how they engage with their kids. We want to be like them, is essentially what we were saying. And as college students, we unofficially adopted them as our mentoring family. And our approach was not to ask them to mentor us, but just to hang around with them and say, can we come to your house for lunch? Where are you going for lunch after church? And we tried to hook up and go with them. And they were very gracious to us and invited us and let us tag along. And there are things we do in our life now that we picked up from Wayne and Lois. And we absolutely love this couple. Their oldest son, Kevin, had hemophilia. And this was back in the early 80s when we knew them and were engaged with him. He went away to college, went to college in Tennessee. And he had to have regular transfusions of blood. And he had a prescription, and he would have to take care of this on his own. And when he was in college, those prescriptions were shipped to him from a pharmaceutical company. Now, one day in the mail, Wayne and Lois got a letter from this company saying, we just shipped some product to your son. It's tainted, and he shouldn't take it. So they immediately got on the phone, called their son, and he had taken it an hour before they called. He contracted AIDS, and he died. Now, that's a load in your dump truck. If they're driving a dump truck down the road, that's like putting a big, huge boulder in the back of the truck, and bam, there it is. And you can imagine what this does to the scenario of now I want to meet your needs, and you need to meet my needs, and I have some expectations here, and I'm torn up, and you're torn up, and I don't have any energy to meet your needs, and you don't have any energy to meet my needs. All I can think about is my son is gone. We're devastated. It's a heavy load in the dump truck. But you know what? This is not a hard counseling context. It really isn't. The issues are clear. There's no fuzziness. The emotional weight is huge, but the issue is not difficult. There's a huge clarity there. So that's scenario number one. Now, God forbid that happen to any of us. But God is good and God is gracious, and they picked up and moved on and lived their life and continued to be great examples to us in the aftermath of that. Challenging things like, do we sue the company? What do we do? What's the Christian response in this whole context? And being able to kind of walk through some of that with them, even though it became to be at a distance for us because we had moved away, was just a privilege. But to see them was remarkable. The other scenario is much more difficult and much more common. I often tell people, I can help you work through an affair, as devastating as that might be. Because again, the issues are fairly clear and straightforward. The issue is right there in front of you. And I can sit down and walk you through the process. But most of my counseling is not that. It is somebody driving into my office with their dump truck, which is full, but it's full of pebbles. So, sun went down. Just don't have the energy for this. Tired. I got to go to work tomorrow. Big day. Or, you're so stupid. This is just silly. But I'm still kind of frosted. So I take the rock. I look at it. Should I deal with it? No, it's just easier to throw it in the truck. I throw it in the back. I'm driving down the road and it's rattling back there, but and then you just kind of get used to it. You have cars that squeak, or, the seals on your windows don't work quite right, and it's it didn't happen when you first bought it, but now it's kind of whistling a little bit. And you just grow accustomed to it. You just keep driving. If I keep doing that with various kinds of little things or things I'm unwilling to deal with over time, I just keep throwing rocks in the back of my dump truck, guess what? You drive into my office, and your load, weight-wise, is no different than this couple that's just lost their son. But you can't figure it out. And my problem is this, I can't figure it out either. I often say I would be a millionaire if I could find that lever on that dump truck. I could pull it, empty it, God bless you, go on your way. I'd be a millionaire. Because this is the universal problem that people have, is they have a collection of rocks in their dump truck. They are unidentifiable. If I remember them, and you need to understand this, your memory is notoriously bad. All of yours is. You think it's good, and you might be arguing with me right now and saying, well, yours might be bad, but not mine. But studies have shown that memory is notoriously unreliable. And the reason you have trouble now having a conversation 2 weeks after an event is because you've justified it, you've morphed it into something else, you've begun to view it from your perspective. This isn't my fault. He always does this. She always does that. And now my memory is not just a memory of one event. It's a memory of many events, plus my colorful exaggeration of the event that I now begin to view as true. And so when I talked to my wife about the event that happened 4 weeks ago that I was unwilling to speak to her about, she goes, what are you talking about? I don't remember it. Or I don't remember it that way. And now what happens is you start arguing about the details of your memories, which are notoriously unreliable. And the longer you go, the longer the more apt that is to become distorted. And so what truly are you arguing about? You're not arguing about the issue anymore at all. You're arguing about something altogether different. You're arguing about your emotion. And that's why this principle is so important. This happened today. It didn't sit right with me. I feel like an idiot for even bringing it up. But before I go to bed, I said, you know what? That bugged. Sorry, I feel petty, but that bugged. Or, you know what? I don't want to deal with this because tomorrow's a big day. And I don't have the energy for it, and I really want to go to sleep, and I have to go to sleep. But here's what happened today, and if we can't talk about it tonight, we better resolve today that we're going to talk about it at some point in the next day or two. And so I'll make an appointment with you to resolve this. And tonight before I go to bed, I'm going to say, I love you, and I'm going to fix this. We're going to fix this, but we have to fix it because it's bugging me. That's the posture that you need to take each and every day as the beginning of this communication process to avoid these kinds of deteriorations of your emotional regard for your spouse. And it will happen. So it's a marvelous principle, a very simple one. You know, they often say that the difference between success and failure is the implementation of small things that you do each and every day. And the reason people don't do those small things each and every day, and the reason that they're failing at these different areas of their life, is because they don't think that these things matter, these small things, these little things. When in fact, I can make this very strong case biblically for believers that we live a day at a time. We don't let the sun go down on our anger, and we regard the words of Jesus not to worry about tomorrow because today has enough trouble of its own. So I'm not going to borrow from tomorrow's trouble, and I'm not going to carry over my debt till tomorrow because tomorrow has enough trouble of its own. I don't have the resources to pay this debt tomorrow. I've got to pay it today. And so I can't underestimate this principle. And it's a very simple one, but it's one that has lasting benefits for you. So that's the analogy of the dump truck. The other process is this, is that now I've got something on the table. I've raised the issue, and the process now that the issue is on the table is reconciliation. And we want to work towards reconciliation. And I would challenge you, here's another, I'll give you a preview of what we're going to talk about here in a second. This is another balcony conversation you can have. Just keep that in your little cap. We'll explain those in detail. Is what is our reconciliation process? Do we have an established process of reconciliation that we've agreed upon as a husband and a wife? That when we have something go haywire, this is the process we're going to use to resolve our disagreement, our offense. And so I'm going to give you 6 R's for reconciliation. The first one is recognition. Recognizing that there is a problem. Defensiveness is a hindrance to this process. When you have a problem on the table, when my wife raises an issue with me, I get defensive. I don't want to fail. I don't want to be that guy who offended her. I've already painted this huge picture of responsibility in my mind for who I need to be with regard to her. She's God's daughter, and I'm obligated to care for her as such. And so I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to disappoint her. I don't want to disappoint God. So my humanity jumps in when she brings up something that I've done to offend her, and I immediately get defensive. And defensiveness causes me to blame shift, causes me to throw stuff back, it causes me to defend myself, it causes me to not listen to her. So the first step in reconciliation is recognition. So if she brings an issue to me, I want to recognize my part in what I've done in offending her. Now, I read this horrible book years ago. Someone asked me to read it. I hated it. It's a horrible book. And yet in this book was a gem. It's just a marvelous gem in this book. The rest of the book was not worthy of much, except for kindling. But this part was insightful. And he said this, he said, it doesn't matter what my wife brings to my attention as far as an offense in the marriage or something that's gone wrong. That every fight in a marriage has a percentage of fault on both ends. It's very rare that any issue is 100% the fault of somebody. Now, there are times when that may be the case, and even if that's the case, let's just say it is, there's always something I probably could have done better, even if I'm not at fault. And so I'm just going to take responsibility for that small part, even if it's 90% my spouse's fault that this is a problem. I'm just going to grab a hold of the 10% that's my fault and recognize that that's part of the problem. And I'm going to apologize for that part. I thought that was a great insight. It's like, because what that does is it clears the table. It's like, okay, there's a willingness here to at least see that there is fault. And there's, in a normal relationship or healthy relationship, a receptivity then on the flip side. They're much more apt to hear you out if you're acknowledging your fault. So this first part is important, is just to sit down, to look at the problem, and to acknowledge or recognize what part you've played in this process. And so problem analysis is a helpful part of this. And most of us never get out of the blaming and defending part. So what happens is that when this comes up, we never actually move past recognition, problem analysis. We just start blaming and defending. And so now what we've done is raised up a whole bunch of other issues that are brought onto the plate that we have to resolve and talk about. This is an important first step, is recognizing the issue, recognizing especially my fault, and taking responsibility for my part. So recognition and responsibility are the first two R's, and that's important. In a marital situation, it's just recognizing that my spouse has been hurt by my actions. It's at some level, and that their hurt is real. And so that's important. The third thing is regret. So recognition, responsibility, and then regret. And this is important, that there is some sense of remorse about what has happened. That this bothers me that I've hurt you, and I communicate that. The fourth thing is repentance. And this has to do with acknowledging what's going on behind the scenes. Repentance really is a word that has more to do with your mind than your actions. It's a matter of changing your mind, really, that precedes the change of behavior that is typically characterized as repentance. So repentance is actually engaging in my mind, identifying the rationale behind what I did, and truly reflecting remorse for that. And then R is for restoration. It's a word that I'm using instead of forgiveness, because forgiveness doesn't start with R. So restoration, but really what I'm talking about here is forgiveness. And I think the language is important that you use here. This is the place where we actually verbalize, I'm sorry. And so many of us have used that language, I'm sorry, but it needs to have closure to it. I'm sorry is one way. So if it's a circle, I'm sorry is this part. The other thing about just saying I'm sorry is that you can say I'm sorry with attitude. Have you ever done that? Sorry. Jeez. Crying out loud. I said I was sorry. It's not very sincere, or doesn't really help, does it? Am I the only one who's ever said that? I'm good at that. So that's this part. That's only half the equation. If you add the other half, because I'm sorry is my part, the other part in relationship to restore the circle is I'm sorry, I regret, I repent. All of those things are I recognize, and I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? Becomes the closure back of the circle. And it's a little bit more difficult to say, I'm sorry, will you forgive me, with attitude. I'm sure you could, but it's a little more difficult. So when you get to the place where you say, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? then now the circle has been, the invitation to close the circle has been thrown out on the table, and now I have restoration. But until that happens, I've only got one side of the circle out there, and I can walk away from that. I said I was sorry. She's still mad, and then you can add whatever you add after that, which typically isn't good. So, sorry, will you forgive me?
Actually, my mind was a little slower as I went. Goes back to because I think it may have been more then my idea was my idea around the would be think before. Right? So when you get to the point of having to address them, I actually went, so you have to the way you want to say the why. My thought, but I'm sure it doesn't. You're in this relationship forever, and so that gives you an opportunity to say, not everything has to happen. You have 60 years to work on this. There's a patience there. There's and we don't have to deal with this today. We don't have to deal with this, and so the perfect time would be one that when it's necessary for the health of the spiritual being of the body, that's when we address things, rather than to make sure issues don't and so that's the my mind.
I would affirm your desire to be sensitive with your wife until it comes to the point where you're avoiding. So, I do this to her all the time. She'll bring something else. Did you think this was a great time? This is not a good time. I'm not in the mood to talk about this. And that's kind of idiotic. It's like, really, when's there going to be a good time? Is there really a time for my wife to hear, hey, you know what, you messed up. You suck. So yeah, I'm totally with you. Sensitivity and discernment, now's not the time. So when is that time? And again, there have been times where we've said, we can't have this conversation right now. We've got to go to sleep. So let's have this conversation later. So you might, in your mind, say, I need to have this conversation. Now's not a good time. I want to be sensitive to my wife. When would be that good time, and what's a reasonable time to wait? So I would, again, encourage you, if at all possible, that day is your parameter. And yeah, on that day, I want to pick the best time.
I guess maybe it's more that was, I anticipated that it would be possible maybe for me to unload the small patterns, but not have to do it. And maybe what you're saying is that's not realistic.
Sometimes it's your only option, especially when the truck gets a little bigger. And maybe what I would suggest you do if you've got a grouping of pebbles and I've got stuff to talk about, we need to talk about it, is to say, let's set a time to sit down and talk about this. And so we kind of pull back away from the day-to-day stuff and say, here's a couple things that I've got rolling around. I want to put them out, get them out on the table. Let's talk about it. I'm not sure how big a deal it is, or I want to explore this. I just don't want it to linger, because the longer you let it linger, it morphs. They start the value, the emphasis, the reality of it begins to change, and so you want to be careful with that.
So maybe the principle would be
If you just want to tell us what's going on, we could all help you right now.
If you are capable of these small things that are maybe they just bounce off the side of your nose, that's okay. But if you notice that this is the cumulative game right up, then you don't let it accumulate. Make sure that you before it becomes a load.
Yes. Yeah. What I've done with people who have a load and I can't delineate it, although they do have some specific things that are coming up, is I have a process that I call the blank check. And at some point you say, I can't really even work through all this stuff, but I'm going to write you a blank check right now, and I'm just going to give a good shot at letting this stuff go and forgiving you for the load. In that process, when I do that, though, I have people jot things down that are non-negotiables that they have to resolve. And so the bulk of the things I'm going to let go, but here's an issue that I can't let go. A corollary to that would also be that in our lives we have habitual things that we need to start addressing, that are habits, that are repeated arguments that we continually have. You've all had these. You feel like you've had the same argument week after week after week after week. So at some point you've got to step back and say, what's that all about? And let's talk about habits, okay? Look who's here.
Yeah, I think the goal is always not to put anything in the dump truck, because emptying it's hard. So the goal is not to throw something back there. But if there's something my spouse is dealing with, or a friend or whoever, that is something that I recognize, they have other things going on right now, and this isn't it. I'm not necessarily throwing a rock in my dump truck because I find it hard to deal with. I'm like, do you understand what I'm saying? Some things you'll go, okay, you know better, and you're perfectly capable of doing this, and it's irritating, so it's kind of a rock. Other things, you go, this is part and parcel of where they are in life, and it's not really, I'm not really throwing it in my dump truck. I'm aware of it, and that maybe at some point we'll have to deal with it, but it's not quite the same thing.
Well, that's a discernment between an offense and a character,
But I think the
area of
hard
character
thing
that you need to grow.
is to say in your head, this is the danger, is to say in your head, I'll just make sure there's only a couple things bumping around in my dump truck. The problem is you're not aware of the emotional weight that's building in the dump truck. It's just there building, and until it's big, you don't even recognize it. And so to say, I can keep a handle on this and I just won't let it get too big, you're walking down a slippery slope there.
Yeah.
The other thing is, which we'll address, I don't think we ever address it specifically, but I think it's the next two things I'm going to say, I'm going to make some gender kind of distinctions that don't really fit, so make them fit. If whichever way they fit for you, I'm going to say men, but not necessarily. There's a power element in everything, in every relationship, and we're going to talk about that much more in depth after lunch. But part of the problem with arguments is we have this idea that one of us wins, and you just need to ditch that. There is no place in marriage for someone to be the winner. He's my other half. If I win, he loses. That is not a win for me.
She's being so nice to me right now.
We are not here to find a winner. We're here to figure out a way to live in harmony and resolve things. Because I concede that, oh yeah, you have a point and I need to change that. No one won or lost. If you're listening to your spouse, making your next argument so you can win the argument, time out. What are you saying about the value of that person? They're your spouse. They're the person you love. We're not looking to win an argument. We're looking for a way for both of us, quit laughing at me, both of us to come out as winners. We're looking for a win-win here. If one of us has a need that's not being met and we're addressing it, we're not looking to place blame. We're looking to figure out a way to meet the need.
She's being very kind to me. This took me about 10, 15 years to learn. And she was consistently telling me, why do you always have to win? Why every time we have a conversation, argument, we're trying to resolve something, you make it into competition? And I went, no, I didn't. And it's like, at some point it clicked and I went, wow, I do that. It's not a clean conversation. I just need to get on top. And she needs to be wrong, and I need to be right. And you're being nice to me, and I thank you for that, because she didn't have a problem with this at all. I did, and it's a challenge.
Yeah,
Especially for a sports guy. Aaron's not in the room.
Yeah, if you're
This is Aaron's
competitive-
hugest problem. Should you just pray for Rita about this? Although maybe they're both
They're
like
both
that.
pretty competitive.
Yeah.
I am not a competitive person. But the other thing is, and I think it took me a long time to be able to communicate this effectively. So maybe I'll save some of you younger couples a little time. Oftentimes, and I'm going to totally be sexist here, as women, emotions just swell up and you feel overwhelmed or you feel sad or whatever, and you can't really put your finger on it. And for some reason, that's not okay. You can't just say, I'm overwhelmed and I want to cry and I really couldn't tell you why. And so you start, well, it's got to be something he did. And pretty soon you're inventing an argument because somehow it's his fault that you're emotional. I probably did this more when we were dating. I was still pretty young. But at some point, but the problem is, I think for the most part, guys are fixers. So if you're crying, he wants to fix it. So just tell me what it is so I can fix it. And it's like, there's nothing to fix. I just need to cry and have you go, okay, it'll be okay. And I would be fine. And instead we end up in this big argument because I was feeling emotional and somehow had to make it something because I felt stupid to just be emotional. And feeling he had to fix it and had to come out on top. Obviously, he didn't do anything, and really he didn't. And so it became this huge something over nothing.
This out, and then after all that, you want to have sex. Because that'll fix everything.
But I think sometimes...
Let's just do it, honey.
This is kind of where we came to. Is like, okay, I'm just feeling weepy. And he's like, he'll go, is this something I have to fix? No. And so he'll just come over and hug me and it'll be okay, whatever. And I will feel instantly much better. All I needed was someone to hug me and say, it'll be okay. You're fine. We're fine. The kids will be fine. It'll all work out. I didn't need fixing. And
Also
so,
being very nice to me right now because that didn't happen until a lot later, until after you kind of go, oh. So if you can figure out how to do that without being patronizing, guys, it'll be okay, honey. Because that doesn't work either. If you can figure out how to do that, just say, hey, I'm here. It'll be okay. Is there something I did? No, great. Well, hey, come on over. It'll be all right.
And I think, realistically, we need to recognize, guys, you have no appreciation for this. The hormonal roller coaster is real and it may be totally irrational, but there it is. And you guys have pregnant women. So that's a whole nother.
Glad you said that.
No, really. And then after they're born, I had one of my kids severe postpartum. And, you're it's frustrating because in your head, you're going, I'm insane. And I can't stop it. I just want to cry all the time. And I love this baby. He's gorgeous, but I can't stop crying. And if and so it's hard to step back and go and not, you don't want to say, I'm insane. You want to say, I have a reason for being emotional. And so you start looking for one. And so I think we need to have the ability to step back and go, you know what? I'm just on a roller coaster ride right now, and I just need you to ride it with me and be supportive without being condescending. And you need to realize that even though it's hormonal driven, doesn't mean she's not feeling what she's feeling. And so you need to recognize that there may be nothing in her life that's causing the sadness. The sadness is real, and it's there, or the feeling of overwhelmingness is there. But all of that to say, this makes it sound like every time you have an upset, there's a problem. Oftentimes, there's not. There's just an emotional need that didn't happen to be positive, that you needed a comforter and a friend to walk through it with you, not to fix it, not to resolve anything, but just to be there in life's journey to walk with you. And sometimes that's all you need. And we need to be more open about saying, that's what I need right now. And not that it doesn't ever flip. I think it totally does. Looking at it from a woman's perspective, it seems to happen more frequently to me. Although that's not Steve's Russian. They tend to, get depressed too. So I shouldn't say that.
I'm pretty moody. So a couple things and we'll break for lunch. The first one is a very practical method. I feel you're in a relationship that is hard or challenging. It's not easy. There are things you need to do to master this relationship. If I went to your job site whatever that was, and just examined the process of your job, I imagine that there is regular ongoing training at your job. That you invest in training, that you submit to training, that you pursue it, that if you're in business for yourself, you keep up to date on the industry standards. You try to be the best you possibly could be. And you need to put that same sort of effort into this very important relationship in your life. And not many of us are expert communicators. And the marriage relationship and the whole maintenance of the marriage relationship is high-end communication. And you may be totally familiar with this particular principle, and that's fine. I'm going to throw it out there. It's an important one. But you need to become experts at communication. And the more effort you put into the training in your marriage, the nuts and bolts skills of marriage and communication, the better off your relationship's going to be. And the more you implement those things and practice them, the better it gets. I can't remember, we talked about this the other day, we can't remember the last time we had a fight. Now, when people normally tell me that, I said, you just aren't being honest with each other. If you're honest with each other, you're going to fight, But, we've managed to get better at this, I think. And it's a good thing, and we work at it. But the one method I want to throw out is a very basic communication method called mirroring. And you're all familiar with mirroring, especially if you've ever watched Saturday Night Live. Because I would say at least a quarter of the skits mock mirroring at some level. If you see the psychologist skit in the psychologist's office, well, what I hear you saying is, and you kind of go, oh, that drives me crazy when people do that. And mirroring is a very important communication method that I would encourage you to use, especially in this assignment that you have here of the questions, the 3 sets of questions. And mirroring is basically this. Number 1, I shut down my need to say my part. That's the first principle of mirroring. I shut it down. I am not defending myself right now. I'm not thinking about my retort right now. I'm not thinking about my response. I am actively listening to what this person is saying, and then when they're done saying it, I mirror it back to them. Now, when you first start this, it's highly irritating. It's just infuriating. I want you to do this, but I don't want you to do this. When you get good at this, people don't know you're doing it. Okay? So you basically take what they said. What your first salvo back is to communicate to this person that you understood what they said. And the most basic way to do that is just to mimic, to just repeat what they said. That's the irritating part. When you get better at this and you actually care about what the person's saying, you repeat back what they said with the intention of making sure that it's clear. And so you don't use the exact words, you just respond. And then another element of mirroring would be active questioning. So you have active listening and active questioning, because I want to understand, because the principle here in mirroring is I want to understand what you are saying, is I'm going to then probe. I'm going to use questions to pull out really what you meant, because your first attempt might not have been real good. And I'm not going to hold you to that. That's not what you said. This is what you said. And now we're going to hold people to the first thing they said. And typically when we first jump into this relationship of reconciliation, or this process of reconciliation, we're hurt, we're emotional, and we don't speak necessarily clearly. We're speaking from a place of hurt. And so it might not come out correctly or right. And so I'm not going to hold you to that. I'm going to begin to probe and really find out what's there. And then I'm only going to respond when I've fully assured you that I've heard you. Now, mirroring is a marvelous tool if you can master it, because here's what it will do for you. If you mirror correctly, what you will infuse into your partner's heart and soul is a sense of trustworthiness. They will have a great sense of acceptance and security from you when you do this. you will affirm those things. And they will have this great sense of trust in you. I can tell him anything because even if I say it wrong, he's not going to hold it against me. He's going to help me get to what I really want to say. And then, on top of that, we're going to fix it. Now, if I can communicate that posture to my wife and how I communicate, guess what? This woman is hooked on me. It doesn't happen often. And so you will find that that's just this tremendous tool that pulls this person towards you. Both ends, actually. It works for us too, gals. It's an amazing trust-building process. It's premised also on the fact that I'm not going anywhere. I don't have to defend myself in the next 5 minutes. She's not going anywhere. It's not like I'm never going to have an opportunity to tell her my side. I'll have that opportunity at some point. But right now, sit down, shut up, and listen. That's all I have to do. So mirroring is very important, and it's very basic. But I find people just don't do it. We understand the basicness of it, but we just don't do it. And again, it's these very simple things that we ignore that really are making the difference. So I would encourage that practice. Now, here's one last thing for you. I mean, this is a hugely important thing, and this is the distinction between kinds of conversations in your life. And I just basically distill it to 2 types. There might be more nuance, but let's just talk about 2 types of conversations in your married life. The first one, well, picture your life as a journey. And by the way, the metaphors, don't make them work too hard. You know, they're beginning illustrations. If you try to make them work too hard, the analogies break down. They don't really work at all. So just kind of let them be what they are.
Ask what the 6th R was.
Repair. Yeah, I skipped that one, didn't I? So if there's a need for some sort of repair, then I'm going to do it. And that depends on the scenario. But I want to basically make sure that I fix it. You know, if I break your window, I'm going to pay for it. And that needs to happen even in a married relationship. Don't assume that because you're married, you don't have to fix things at some level if they're fixable, or make some sort of repair. It's not always going to be, remuneration or money, but it might be, I don't know. So if your life is like a journey, or you're walking down the road of life, we have 2 conversations that happen on the road, and then intentional conversations where we get off the road and put ourselves up into a vantage point where we can look down on the road and see the beginnings, where we are, and where we're headed. So I call those balcony conversations. So we have conversations on the road and conversations in the balcony. Road conversations include arguments, details, words of affection, words just like, I love you, honey, texting during the day, miss you today, whatever you might do along the way. Details of life, who's paying that bill, where's the kids' game today, what are we doing for dinner, those kinds of things. Just kind of nuts and bolts conversations, the things that you have along the way. And it's a wide swath of conversations, but they're conversations you just have along the way. I'm going to call them unintentional. They just happen. They happen because the circumstances drive it, because our life drives it, because as we're on the road, we've got to figure these things out. Balcony conversations are intentional conversations. They're conversations that are like this. We have to have a talk. We have to talk about this. We got to figure this out. Balcony conversations include vision and values clarification. They include post-game analysis. They include vision and direction. They are intentional. The assignment that you had is a balcony conversation assignment. You might talk about those things along the road, but to sit back and say, give me your top 5. Let's talk about the big picture of what you expect and what your needs are. You might have that conversation where you're going, I really need you to do this right now. And so you express expectations there, but this is intentionally clarifying those things. So for instance, you might on the road say this, hey, in an argument, don't be bringing up the past. That's not fair fighting. That's just not fair. And so what's happened with that, I think that's an important principle on the road, but what's happened is that's become a universal principle. So it's not fair to bring up the past. But isn't that silly? Wait, time out. This issue of competition was something that took me, I'm going to say, generously, it took me 10 years to learn. So it was a habit that I had that every time we had a fight, I had to win. At some point, we had to pull back and say, we're not fighting right now, but let's talk about how you fight. And this is what you do when we fight. So we've got to talk about that. And the right time to talk about that is not when you're fighting, because it just doesn't work. So you have to make a mental note and say, we're going to have a conversation about that and resolve it. We always do this, or you always do this. That's maybe not fair in the moment. But if it's true, don't you have to take care of that? Don't you have to actually have a conversation about the fact of the matter is you do this every time we fight. That's a second issue, and it can't just be left on the table because it's not fair to bring up the past. That's just silly. Because those habits are things that actually do need to be resolved, and I do need to affect a change in my life with those bad habits or character qualities that I have. And where am I going to do that? Where am I going to have that conversation? And so you have to incorporate some context in which you have what I call balcony conversations. And there are a couple rules for these conversations. Number one, if I give you this assignment in a counseling situation, I'll say you cannot have this powwow about needs, strengths, and problems at home. Cannot happen in your house. That's the road. Let's actually find a geographical balcony. It could be Starbucks. It could be the park. It could be a restaurant. It could be, well, not for you. It could be the beach. The mountains, wherever it is, it could be, just don't do it at home. Now, obviously, there might be sometimes you have to violate that principle, but don't do it at home. Go ahead.
Would you tend to say that it's good to have like one spot that's dedicated to that?
Not necessarily, but it could be. This is the spot we have these conversations.
We did that with our kids. If they were in high school and we needed to have a balcony conversation, they kind of knew because we were going to breakfast at Carl's.
Yeah, let's go have breakfast. They could be. It doesn't have to be, but it could be. But just pull that away from there and then give yourself an extended period of time where you're going to have a resolution to this, plan it, have some sort of agenda. It communicates that there's something different going on here. There's something different that's happening here. And typically, when we do it in the habitual place of where we live, we sometimes fall back into the patterns that we've developed on the road, and sometimes that's not healthy for us. So I would just encourage you to pull back. These are, I think, critical kinds of conversations. Initially in your life, you may have to plan them and be very intentional. Later on in your life, you'll find that they're so valuable that you just kind of have balcony-style conversations regularly. You early parents want to master balcony conversations because this is how you impart values to your children, is by having balcony conversations while your kids are listening. You're not lecturing them. You're not talking to them. We have found this may be the most powerful way to pass on values to our kids. And it's hilarious because we'll have not necessarily the nitty-gritty conversations between the two of us that need to be personal, but values, larger values conversations we would have oftentimes when we were driving somewhere and our kids were listening. We weren't lecturing them, we weren't talking to them, but we talked about significant things like dating, how to treat women, how to engage in a dating relationship, the purpose of dating relationships, the value of education, all sorts of things that we would have conversations about that they were listening to. And this is the power of this. Your kids don't, when they have the same sort of propensities you do. So when you start lecturing them, they start tuning out. They become defensive, like, I already know this, Dad, or whatever it is that goes to the little head. And they start having an argumentative posture by default. But when you don't address them and you just have a vibrant conversation this way, they're like hooked in. They're listening and they want to know what you think. And we call it planting deep seeds, because later on they begin to mimic you and they don't even know that they're doing it. And so you've taken a value that you have that you want them to share, and you've planted it in their head deep, and it starts to grow. And then they reflect those values. It's a very powerful tool. So you want to master this, number one, because it's healthy for you and your marriage to resolve issues, to clarify things, to dream, and to have vision and direction. And it's also helpful. These are the kinds of conversations that you want to nurture and cultivate in your marriage, because it keeps you out of the rut of the road. Because if all your life is about is managing the day-to-day, then your marriage becomes a rut. And part of the vibrancy of your relationship is going to be in this bigger idea, conversation, picture, values, dreams, visions. This is who we are. This is what's keeping our marriage substantive. It's not just rote. So it's a very powerful practice that you want to somehow intentionally incorporate into your life. And oftentimes the way to do that is to specifically address ongoing issues, to clarify your values, to talk about habits that you want to deal with, to talk about the future, all of those things. All right, so lunchtime.